Iran said it would retaliate, and tonight it did, launching missiles at US bases in Qatar, with air raid sirens also sounding in Bahrain, home to the US Fifth Fleet. The main US base in northeast Syria is also on full alert. Airspace over much of the region remains closed. The Udeid Air Base is the biggest US military facility in the region. It's a key air and logistics hub with around 10,000 American troops stationed there. Iranian state media said the Asad Airbase in Iraq was also targeted, but there have been no reports of any explosions there. All this after Israel gave details of its latest strikes on Iranian government sites in Tehran. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilson, reports.
Tonight, Qatar's air defences are active as Iran targets the US base at Al Udeid, just outside Doha. At least one missile was intercepted. Airspace over Bahrain and the UAE has also been closed as Iran carries out its revenge, Operation Annunciation of Victory. Last month, President Trump visited the 10,000 US service personnel at Al Udeid, the biggest US base in the region, sounding relaxed.
But I want to give a special hello to Al Udeid Air Base, sometimes referred to as the Deed. That's a little sinister.
Tonight, Iran reportedly coordinated its attacks with Qatar so the base could be evacuated, a sign that the Islamic Republic's revenge may be to some extent performative. The US base at Ain al-Assad in Iraq, shown here after an Iranian attack in 2020, is reported also to be under fire tonight. Then as now, the Iranians gave advance warning, retaliation as symbolism to save face. This morning, without warning, Iran fired a missile that hit the desert near Ashdod in Israel. The Israeli Air Force has also been in action. Earlier today in Tehran, a security camera captured the moment the Israelis struck Evin prison. People drove towards the explosion. One political prisoner managed to call his family, who recorded the conversation.
They dropped bombs on us. They're still bombing. Some people have been injured. The windows were ripped out. Everyone scattered. It's still going on. I don't know if it's targeted or not, because bombing a prison doesn't make sense at all.
Prison buildings were damaged and some prisoners reportedly injured. 2 French nationals are amongst those being held. People rushed to see if their family members had been hurt or had escaped.
It's a complete disaster. I feel like I'm losing my mind. They've hit Ward 7, Ward 9, the solitary confinement wing. They've destroyed everything. My son's life is in danger. Why won't they release him?
A few miles to the west in Karaj, Israel targeted a Revolutionary Guard headquarters, as well as routes to the Fordo nuclear facility, presumably to prevent access. Satellite photos show that the US bombing damaged the site, but it's impossible to confirm President Trump's assertion that Iran's nuclear program has been obliterated.
At this time, no one, including the IEA, is in a position to have fully assessed the underground damage at Fordo. Given the explosive payload utilized and the extreme vibration-sensitive nature of centrifuges, very significant damage is expected to have occurred.
Iran's foreign minister was in Moscow trying to drum up diplomatic support.
These aggressive actions by Israel and the US are completely illegitimate and violate international rules and norms. We are defending our sovereignty and country, and our defense is legitimate.
The Russian leader has been lukewarm in his support for his ally Iran, condemning the US and Israel, but showing no desire for military engagement.
This absolutely unprovoked aggression against Iran has no basis or justification whatsoever.
European leaders are doing a diplomatic dance, professing themselves in favour of talks, not strikes, while seemingly glad that the Americans have done the dirty work.
NATO has said Iran should not, and this is a consistent position of NATO, Iran should not have its hands on a nuclear weapon. So, and I would not agree that this is against international law what the US did.
In Tehran, state TV broadcasting sporadically is trying to rally the nation, playing Moeen, a beloved singer previously banned by the country's Islamic rulers. I love my homeland, he sings, the wellspring of art and culture. Patriotic music for Iranians as they wait to see if America and Israel will strike their homeland again.
Well, let's go to Israel now and get the latest from our foreign affairs correspondent, Secunda Kamani in Tel Aviv. Secunda.
Well, Chris, those images from the skies above Qatar are very dramatic, aren't they? Air defences in action trying to shoot down Iranian missiles. But I think all the signs are that this was a carefully calculated move by the Iranians, designed as a response to America's bombing raid over the weekend, but a response that would not further escalate the situation. Iran stressing, for example, that it used the same number of missiles as America used bombs on Saturday night. Iran, it also seems, as you heard in Lindsay's report there, told the Qataris ahead of this strike they would have presumably passed the message on to the Americans. We know the base had already been evacuated. No casualties were caused. Of course, we'll have to wait and see if Iran has anything further in store, how President Trump reacts. But one Western official I was talking to suggested this was a good opportunity for all sides to take the win, as he put it. What slightly complicates the situation is Israel's ongoing war with Iran. I was speaking to one government lawmaker earlier and asking at what stage Israel's attacks would stop. No real clarity from him, I have to say, although tonight is one of Israel's military spokesmen has said for now the attacks are going to continue.
And so what next?
Well, potentially a return to negotiations. They were taking place between the US and Iran over its nuclear program prior to Israel launching its war with Iran, although they were stuck around this US demand for Iran to completely give up uranium enrichment. Perhaps now that it's weakened, Iran could agree to those kinds of terms. That's unclear, but certainly given Iran has chosen not to launch a larger attack, there's an opportunity for an off-ramp now.
Secunda Kamani in Tel Aviv. Well, I've been speaking to the former director of the CIA, David Petraeus, and I asked what he made of the Iranian attack on the US base in Qatar.
Clearly, if this is it, this was the token Iranian response, well telegraphed, it appears, and impressively defended against. And now we can shift to the diplomatic realm, which again, instead of negotiations, really should be a take it or leave it for Iran to give up its nuclear program, all of it, and to end it, and to allow the IAEA full inspection of the dismantlement of that program.
Why should Iran submit to international inspection when Israel doesn't?
Because they're in a very, very weak position. They are not trusted. They cannot be allowed to have nuclear weapons.
And what do you say to those who say, look, this is a sovereign nation and it needs to be respected, not pushed around by, you know, the imperial power America?
I'd say that this, quote, sovereign nation has been the biggest supporter of terrorism, not just in the Middle East, but arguably in the world.
I mean, you know what the other side of that argument is, don't you? I mean, and the Iranians make it in terms of US foreign policy and the impact on the wider world and the behavior of Israel with regards to its neighbors. I mean, down this route, there only seems to be more conflict.
I disagree. Down this route, there's going to be Iranian capitulation, or certainly conflict will continue, and they're going to come out on the short end of it, as they already are. Look, Iran has already had its two most important proxies Lebanese Hezbollah and Hamas dramatically degraded. They've lost their ally in Syria with the overthrow of the murderous Bashar al-Assad regime. The Houthis aren't as strong as they were, and the Iraqi Shia militia are also seeming to take a low-profile approach to this. And they are dramatically diminished as well.
If, as seems likely, Iran has managed to get its enriched uranium out of those premises before they were bombed, doesn't there remain the risk, whoever is in charge of that country eventually, of a dirty bomb or of uranium and centrifuges protected to be able to get to a nuclear weapon quite quickly?
Well, I think quite quickly at this point in time is probably out of the question. Beyond that, I think that we will end up knowing what has happened, whether that highly enriched uranium that was stockpiled at a couple of different locations and the advanced centrifuges in particular have been destroyed or not. That's the job of intelligence. We've seen how extraordinarily impressively Israel and Mossad have penetrated the country. And obviously the U.S. has considerable means of determining what has happened as well. And at the end of the day, I don't think that is going to be left. That will be one of the elements of an agreement that will be insisted upon by the United States. And frankly, if they don't agree to that, Israel can continue to degrade elements of the regime that threaten the region virtually at will, given the real destruction of any meaningful strategic air and ballistic missile defenses in Iran.
And what do you make of Israel's targeting of its operations? It seems to be hitting targets close to civilian facilities, universities. It's hitting targets in the center of Tehran now. Is it clear what they're trying to do?
I think it is. I think they have been, frankly, incredibly impressive in their targeting, taking out probably now that, well, approaching 20 nuclear scientists quite precisely, taking out centers of research, again, quite precisely, taking out military and regime leaders very precisely, and now expanding the target list to go after military headquarters, air bases, missile launchers and stockpiles and so forth. I think they've done an incredible job in that regard.
General Petraeus, thank you very much indeed.
Great to be with you.
Well, Donald Trump has been on social media claiming the sites that we hit in Iran were totally destroyed and everyone knows it. Only the fake news would say anything different in order to try and demean as much as possible. Remember, his own vice president said something quite different and just said there had been considerable damage. But joining me now is Mary Beth Long, who's a former US Assistant Defense Secretary for International Security Affairs. She was also previously chair of the group responsible for NATO's nuclear policy. Also here is Ali Vaez, who's the Iran project director of the International Crisis Group. Mary Beth Long, first of all, I mean, it's looking very much like the Third Gulf War has started, and Congress didn't vote for it, and America was divided, and it's just kind of here.
Well, I think basically Iran would be responsible for that. Over the last year, this president has been very clear that if Iran continued its activities, not only against Israel, but against other allies and neighbors in the region, Lebanon, look what's happening in Syria, look what's happening in Iraq, they doubled down and the president has responded accordingly. I think that he'll sort it out with Congress as we usually do. And I don't think it's as clear as some people would believe that there's some illegality here. We'll sort it out.
I mean, I know Iran is to blame is the line for everyone who supports what's been going on. But the fact is, these were American attacks that followed Israeli attacks. And there's a sort of a play acting going on here, isn't there? I mean, in that Donald Trump's there in the White House, you know, projecting, I'm deciding what's going to happen next. The truth is, Benjamin Netanyahu started this, didn't he? He's calling the shots.
Oh, I think anyone who say that is not paying attention to the world. I don't think October 3rd and what happened, in Israel, October 7th, was Benjamin Netanyahu.
But this
that was
war
Iran.
is Netanyahu, isn't it,
But
on
this
Iran?
is all part of a much larger picture. To focus on just this particular activity ignores the fact that the president was threatened at the G7 just recently. He had Iranian assassination teams, which the Iranians told him about. I mean, this is not just a week or 24 hours. This has been a long time coming.
Ali Vaez, I mean, Iran is play acting too, isn't it? Sending missiles but ringing in advance.
That's right. I think the Iranians opted for a symbolic response to U.S. attack because they don't want further U.S. involvement in this conflict. They want to focus on Israel. They want to reach a balance of devastation with Israel so that Israel doesn't do what it has done in Lebanon now, which is that it has a ceasefire with Hezbollah, but it still goes in at will whenever it wants and continues bombing Israel. And Iran, as a sovereign state, cannot allow something like that to stand. But it does not want the U.S. to get further involved.
So how does this go to the next stage? Is it possible effectively to have peace with America but war with Israel at the same time?
No, I don't think it is. But the Iranians are hoping that President Trump will pull the plug on Prime Minister Netanyahu's ability to continue this conflict, given the fact that Israel has escalation domination, but it has a lower pain threshold for pain compared to Iran. And President Trump also, his base doesn't want another U.S. military entanglement in that part of the world. The U.S. always goes in thinking that military interventions in the Middle East would be clean and contained. They turn into a quagmire, and his MAGA base is absolutely against that.
Mary Beth, you're nodding along.
I think Ali has a point. If Iran's objective is to get the U.S. to remove itself from this conflict, what it did just today in attacking U.S. forces in at least 3 or 4 countries, while symbolic and necessary, and I think absolutely predictable, because Iran has to save its faith, that face may cost them further involvement. This is not the way to deal with this president.
What is the way to deal with this president?
Listen to what he says and meet him on the negotiating field, which
But they were negotiating, weren't they? That's
really
why they're
were.
confused. They say we were in the middle of talks, we were about to meet you, and then you bomb us. And then say we've got to go back to talks.
Well, that was convenient for their story, but everybody else will
true.
tell you. I happen to disagree with you there.
Well, were they not scheduled to have talks? They were supposed to be talking to
Talks were
Wickoff.
delayed in day. They were not in person. People were showing up. They were showing up with positions that hadn't been modified. I mean, having talks for the sake of talks can only go on for so long. And that's what this president was facing. And then when you combine that with the fact that we tried to assassinate you and we insult you at the G7 by threatening to attack you with terrorists in your own country, what did this leadership expect? I fully think that the IRGC and the Iranian people should stand up and say, this is not working for us.
Do you think, Ali, America and Israel are underestimating what's possible from Iran in terms of their response?
Absolutely. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu went in, thought with the ingenious, very impressive opening salvo of this conflict, the Iranian regime would be destabilized and then the Iranian people would rise up and topple the regime because it's a very unpopular regime. But it is much more resilient, I think, than Prime Minister Netanyahu expected, and it can still do a lot of damage in the region, even cause a regional conflagration, which would be at everyone's expense, including Israel, if this further continues. I think President Trump, from the beginning, had the right instinct that negotiations was a much better pathway. But unfortunately, if you look at the amount of time that Steve Witkoff spent with his Iranian counterpart, it's less than 24 hours.
It's almost nothing.
It took 2.5 years to negotiate the first nuclear agreement with Iran. And the president started with no weaponization policy, which was the right approach, and allowed his agenda to be hijacked by Prime Minister Netanyahu. And he changed the goalpost in the middle of the talks, pursuing zero enrichment, asking for Iranian capitulation. And you know, the only thing that Iranians perceive as more perilous than suffering from Israeli or American bombs is surrendering to American terms.
Right, and so what do you think Iran might do with what it's managed to get out of Fordo? I mean, the suggestion, their claim is that, you know, the uranium and the centrifuges have been taken somewhere else. You have Trump here saying they've been totally destroyed. Truth is probably somewhere in between, isn't it?
It is, but the problem is we have no way of verifying because UN inspectors are no longer able to access these sites. And, you know, in this kind of operations, you either have boots on the ground or inspectors on the ground, and we have neither right now. So we don't know. And this is why diplomacy is a much better way of dismantling Iran's nuclear program in a verifiable manner than dropping bombs.
If diplomacy, Mary Beth, is about saying you need to abandon your ambition and allow in inspectors, isn't there going to be some sort of quid pro quo in which Israel also has to submit to inspection? Everyone knows they've got international weapons and international, nuclear weapons and nuclear programs, and they aren't accountable to anyone for them.
Well, I think, but actually, you have a very important point, and it's exactly the point I think this president is making. We've had inspections. We've had years. We've had decades of inspections. We've had IAEA sanctions. We've had violations
but not in
of
Israel.
inspections. No, hang on. For Iran, and it is not Israel that's threatening and bombing and attacking its neighbors. It's Iran.
Well, it is literally Israel that is threatening and bombing its neighbors right now.
Oh, but it's not
and has
what
been for a year and a half.
But it's not what started it. Hang on. But you're talking about negotiations and diplomacy. And the one thing that we've learned through all of this is the negotiations and diplomacy and the IAEA inspections and the chances after chances with Iran have done nothing but advance the program. So this president is not going to repeat a failing policy and failing history. He gave an opportunity. He was very clear what that opportunity was. And instead, Iran came back and threatened to assassinate him and threatened to unleash terrorism in the United States. The idea that they would then try to get this president back to the original starting position, which was we can contain you, we can rely on you as a partner, is ridiculous.
Mary Beth Long, Ali Vaez, thank you both very much indeed. Well, meanwhile, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is growing more and more dire by the day. According to the United Nations, more than 400 people have died trying to access food aid in the past month alone. They describe the situation as a death sentence for people just trying to survive. Secunda Kamani reports, and a warning, there are distressing images in this report.
They came hoping to collect food for their families. They left carting away the dead. A man's body covered by the empty cardboard box of aid he wanted to take home. People came here because they were hungry, he says, but the Israeli army started firing bullets and shells at them. It's an almost daily tragedy. Palestinians gunned down whilst desperately searching for food. This time, it wasn't outside the new Israeli and US-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation sites, but in the north, where a limited number of UN and other trucks are at times allowed to enter by Israel.
People are fighting just to get a bite of food. What did we do to deserve seeing people die in front of us?
The UN says Gaza's entire population is at risk of famine. And in these real-life hunger games, the strongest push their way to the front, others left behind.
I came to get food to feed my younger siblings and bring them what's being distributed here, but I've been coming here for more than 3 days without any success.
At least 9 people were killed in this one attack. The Israeli army had no comment. You wonder how anyone has tears left amidst such grief. He was just an innocent child, cries this grandfather. Where is the humanity? Prior to the war with Iran, international criticism of Israel's actions here had been growing. Today, the EU debated suspending the pact that governs their relationship with Israel, though that's unlikely to happen. Israeli officials deny deliberately starving Gazans, but visiting the besieged strip, the local head of the UN's Humanitarian Affairs Office was damning of Israel's actions.
What we are seeing is carnage. It is weaponized hunger. It is forced displacement, and it's a death sentence for people just trying to survive. All of this combined, it appears to be the erasure of Palestinian life from Gaza.
Palestinians have been ordered to flee more than 80% of Gaza for the supposedly safer tent camps of al-Mawasi by the coast. Last night, an Israeli strike hit here too. The world may be more focused on the war with Iran, but how can we allow such immense suffering in Gaza to be forgotten?
Well, here in Israel, the war with Iran has broad popular support. Many Israelis, most Israelis, see Iran's nuclear program as an existential threat to their lives. But when it comes to the war in Gaza, for quite a while now, the majority of Israelis have said they'll be willing to see an end to that in exchange for the release of the remaining 50 or so Israeli hostages held in Gaza, less than half of whom are believed to be alive. But in recent weeks, really, the conflict with Iran has overshadowed the hostage issue. I've been speaking to the father of one Israeli hostage, and I asked him whether he thought his son's plight was still a government priority.
For the government, no. For the government, no, and now it's getting worse because getting the attack on Iran, which is an important thing, but doing it before the situation in Gaza is closed, before the war in Gaza is over and hostages are back, is putting the hostages aside. The feeling is big frustration.
Well, the war with Iran has seen Prime Minister Netanyahu's popularity rise, and there is a line of thought that actually that might propel him towards ending the conflict in Gaza, because he would be able to stand up to his far-right coalition partners who don't want him to do that. At the same time, Netanyahu has been insisting for quite a while that Hamas must disarm as a precondition for the end of the war, and there's no real clarity as to whether he would be willing to row back from that demand, which has been the major sticking point.
Sikander Kamani in Tel Aviv. Now, it was the question of Iran's ability to make a nuclear weapon that precipitated this latest conflict. But Iranian officials say all enriched uranium had been moved before the American strikes. And satellite images from recent days showed cargo trucks on the move near the Fordo nuclear facility. So how likely is it that those bunker-busting strikes really have obliterated Iran's nuclear program? Joining me from Berlin is William Alberque, who's a senior adjunct fellow at the Pacific Forum. He was previously director of NATO's Arms Control, Disarmament and Non-Proliferation Centre. Good evening and thank you for joining us. What do you deduce from the satellite images that you've seen?
So, first of all, I do think that the centrifuges, the actual ability of Iran to perform enrichment and to convert enriched uranium to metal has been severely damaged, if not very, very close to being completely destroyed. But as you point out, the question is what happened to the enriched uranium? According to Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the IAEA, Iran informed the IAEA that they were moving enriched uranium. They didn't give details, they didn't give a final destination, but that suggests that material has been moved from Fordo and possibly from Isfahan. Isfahan is the facility where they were keeping the most highly enriched uranium. But as you've seen in this imagery, that trucks moving stuff from Fordo would probably include the material that was most recently enriched, which would be a smaller amount, as well as some of the most sensitive centrifuges and other equipment that they can get out of that facility and move into other secret facilities that we might not be able to find.
And what can you do with that, that enriched uranium? Because obviously there's a concern that if this goes bad, that there is the possibility of a dirty bomb.
Well, okay, so what they have right now is not suitable for a dirty bomb at all. If they wanted to create a dirty bomb, they could use spent fuel from a nuclear reactor. But what we're talking about is a gaseous uranium that they're enriching to a higher level. If they're able to reconstitute the ability to enrich it by taking centrifuges and moving them elsewhere, it could take weeks or so to get that back up to 90% or something like that. Then they'd have to turn it into metal to turn it into a bomb. Very, very unlikely that they could do that in any kind of short order. That would take much longer to reconstitute. So I do take the point that they've been delayed on the path to a bomb, but if they hide all this material, then there will be questions as to what was the actual purpose of doing this, aside from taking out the longer range, longer term, larger capabilities that they had buried in these facilities.
So, I mean, by the sounds of it, America would have to do this again in a year or two's time.
That's why negotiations are going to be critical. It really is important that the IAEA get access to Iranian facilities, that Iran tell them where they've moved this stuff, and that it's put back under safeguards. Otherwise, the US and/or Iran are going to have to attack again at some point in the future. I think Trump wants a negotiated end to the conflict, and I think Iran is signaling through a very proportionate counterattack on US facilities, for instance, the base at Qatar, may be signaling that they want out of this conflict as soon as possible and get into negotiations and put this material under safeguard and lock it away.
William Alberque, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, from Washington in the middle of an extraordinary heat wave, over to Jackie in the studio.
Thanks very much, Krish. Well, tonight, the Armed Forces Minister, Luke Pollard, said the UK utterly condemns any escalation after the Iranian missile attack on the US military base in Qatar, and said extra RAF Typhoon jets had arrived in the region to reinforce British positions with protection measures at their highest level. Well, our political editor, Gary Gibbons, is in Westminster. Gary.
The atmosphere here, I would say, is not too tense. You don't get the impression that Whitehall will be burning the midnight oil after these attacks from Iran on American bases. There is a sense in which, as Lindsay Hilson was saying earlier, people think this might be performative. It might be at the lower end of the scale of what Iran could have done in these circumstances. Of course, that could all be a massive miscalculation, but that, I would sense, is the governing mood in Whitehall at the moment. What we did get today was a response from the government here and from other governments around Europe to President Trump's attack on Iranian nuclear facilities over the weekend. And you hear a difference in tone and content. Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, President Macron, Chancellor Merz of Germany, all said that what President Trump did was not illegal. But when the same question is put to the British government, it's almost like they keep saying, oh, sorry, I can't, could you say the question again? I can't quite hear it. They don't actually say anything definitive on the subject. David Lammy was in the House of Commons today. He said legality was a matter for the US. And when he was asked if what the United States had done in Iran was right or wrong, he said it wasn't binary. And I think you get a sense there, and the very fact that Keir Starmer didn't come to the House of Commons today, it's normal, has been for the last 14 years or so, for a Prime Minister to come and report back on a G7 or G8 summit to the House of Commons the moment he's back from that summit. Keir Starmer didn't do that, and I think that all gives you a sense that the questions for this government, the internal questions, the tensions on this issue for this government are really quite something. Focus will now move in Whitehall to trying to make sure that the NATO summit, which convenes tomorrow night, properly meets on Wednesday, that goes as smoothly as possible, and that President Trump turns up. Two things which history teaches us are often in tension.